So excited to have Donna Bergstrom this afternoon, who's newly elected, again, re-elected as the deputy chair of the Republican Party of Minnesota. And congratulations, Donna Bergstrom, on your victory yesterday.
Thank you, Wes, and thank you for having me on your show today. It's a pleasure to be here. I will just say it was a very exciting day on Saturday, and honestly, my phone has not stopped ringing or text messages coming in. So that's been a good thing. But it's really exciting, and I'm glad and I'm very thankful that the delegates elected me to be the deputy chair.
Yes, congratulations, and looking forward to your leadership going into this new fight we have ahead of us. Of course, there's been a lot of victories that we just experienced in this last election, ending in November. So many wins. But what are the issues that you thought were winning issues for the GOP? Of course, nationwide, of course, you've been on national news television before, but here within the state of Minnesota also, what are these issues that really worked well for Republicans that really were winning for our side?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because really I think just nationwide and here in Minnesota too, what we saw on the ballot was really the economy. People voted their pocketbook. It was a struggle for people all over the spectrum. Wherever they found themselves, we all paid those high gas prices. We all paid those $4.69 carton of eggs. We all paid for things that. Right. I mean, when they used to be
Right.
66 cents 4 years ago, and we just kept seeing things turning that were not showing us that things were going to slow down or come back down. So I really think people went to the polls and voted their pocketbook, and Trump gave them that opportunity. President-elect Trump gave them the opportunity to vote for somebody who was going to take control of these prices and get things back in alignment with where we need to be. And then I think the second issue really was the law and order. People were really fired up across the nation about maintaining good law and order, maintaining our borders. And we here in Minnesota, I tell people all the time, we're a border state. We got Canada right above us, and they talk about the southern border all the time, but of course, we know that the northern border also needs to be protected. So those were two really big issues I thought that we saw. And of course, here in Minnesota, we saw so much fraud out of the Governor Walz administration that our candidates were really able to run on that issue and talk about how we're going to, hold government accountable, and in particular hold the Walz administration accountable for, for those different departments that were, caught up in that fraud.
There's, in fact, I'd love to talk about the price of eggs as well, because it's really $6 a dozen out there. It's crazy, and $6 for a gallon of milk and so forth. And bread, $5 for a loaf of bread. That's not even a stronger kind of good bread. It's just sort of your garden variety bread that's costing a lot of money. But with the fraud, there's a new fraud now. There have been these raids, FBI raids in St. Cloud and Minneapolis, due to the autism fraud now. So now we have a whole new level. The autism fraud is related to what we discussed in the last podcast, the fraud that was with the Feeding Our Future scandal. So anything that you think is going to be like a winning issue like that for a future election, just carrying on with, talking about the budget year and getting things responsible, having are you so Trump is going to have an office, Department of Government Efficiency, maybe something. There's been some talk about such a thing here in Minnesota now too.
Right. And I understand that there is somebody who has presented legislation to that effect. I don't recall who it was, but I think that's an excellent idea, in particular, since we've seen what I call the tip of the iceberg with our fraud. I think if you start digging deeper, and one thing I don't think people realize is that government agencies that make a mistake, there is no provision for us to go back and be able to reclaim that money. So if an agency makes a mistake in either their billing or recovering either overpayments or whatever, if it's an error, it is not to get recouped. So there's just different layers within our government, and I like I said, I think what we're seeing is really the tip of the iceberg.
Mm. Were there any insights you had on the election wins and even the losses? Are there some lessons we can learn from the races that were lost as well as the ones that were won? What do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm just watching the news right now because the 54A, which was the Aaron Paul and Brad Tapke race, they were so close. It was 49.89 Paul to 49.95 Tabke. And what happened was there are 20 missing ballots. So so Paul filed an election contest, and that is being worked. I understood that trial was happening today. It's not really a trial; it's a legal proceeding, but that was happening this morning. And so I think that was really a good lesson learned. Is that when people try to say, I'm just going to stay home, my vote doesn't matter. I'm here to tell you that in so many of races in 2024, we saw people come within very close margins. And I'll point out another one, 32B, a Republican obtained 49.04 and his DFL challenger 50.77. I mean, that's very close. That was, I forget, a margin of 300 votes or something like that. But in so many of our races across the state, and of course, I always have to talk about 3B up here in Hermantown, Natalie Zalesnikar, I think her race was about 166. So the message going forward for 2026 is to really impress upon people that their vote counts. It could come down to one vote. It could come down to two votes. Well, how happy would you be if you were able to say, I was the ballot that pushed us over the top? Now, we don't know if you were the ballot, but if you won by two, every single one of us that voted in that race can say we put them over the top. Okay, so I encourage people to really consider getting out there and making a plan to vote. We've got probably not going to change. We'll probably have 46 days of voting again in 2026. Maybe it will. We'll see what happens in the House, but there really is no excuse anymore not to vote, and people need to take that seriously.
Yeah, and we need to be aware of these third-party efforts and the people that crop up to try to take energy away from the main force into some back channel, because those kinds of discussions could really create, the separatists that never want to sort of come in from the cold. It's kind of you've got to form up, and join into the main thrust of the fight, and having your sidebar issue become your single voter issue and then take people astray. I was surprised how many people were on the ballot in Minnesota that I'd never heard of before. And it was just like piles of names. I thought, what is this, ranked choice voting?
Oh,
Like
no.
Oli Pozorski and his Fun Time Band has a party going on or whatever. Every little so I think
Right.
you jogged my memory. I think it's Natalie Zalesnikar who might be the one bringing a really a nice bill that I can get behind. It's about women's rights in Minnesota, and I like that bill that she's establishing. To make bathrooms safe and so forth, and
Right.
keep the dudes out. But my comments are on me. Everybody should understand that, if I say something, I'm just representing myself. So I'm wondering if there were other races that could have been contested too. Like some have said, you could throw a wider net, and maybe even in races that we won, like Walter Hudson's race, why not try to contest or examine the ballots in the case of Walter Hudson or Demuth's race? I forget her first name. Uh,
Lisa, speaker
Lisa.
does.
Yeah. So let's say like Walter run, I thought his margin of victory was like 70-30. So in that case, if you were to look at the ballots and ask for an examination, even though he won, we might find some cases where uh, some shenanigans were played, and that would reveal maybe some techniques that are used. But yeah, we had a number of problems with ballots in Minnesota. You didn't know I was going to bring this up, but I just thought I might show the fact that in Olmsted County, we were all allowed to print out an official ballot, and it says right up at the corner that it's an official ballot. So
Wow.
This was happening all across Minnesota and various counties, but not
Yeah.
supposed to be able to do that.
Well, in 14B, if we remember 14B, that was another race. Our candidate Sue Eck, she on election night was shown as the winner on TV, and everybody got screenshots of that. And I think she was ahead by 4 votes. And then the screen went blank, and then it came back up, and she was, I think, down by 28, and then it went down again, and then it went back up, and she ended up not winning that. And I actually forget the number now, but it was 391, I think. And so what happened there? And so when I went to the canvassing board, which I understood was supposed to be an open meeting based on our open meeting laws here in Minnesota. Only to be told that no, canvassing boards aren't open meetings, so we weren't going to take any questions. However, we were able to ask questions to some of the staff after, and basically the answer we were getting the answer we received was, at election night, they were using a memory card that had been used for a test trial run with the Secretary of State, just put fake numbers in there, loaded it up. Secretary of State got it, they got the thumbs up, and then they brought the memory card back down. So when they put it in for the election night, they forgot to wipe off those numbers, put in new numbers, and added those to the test numbers, and those got sent in. So anyway, my only point with that is, there's a lot of ways that we need to tighten up our elections. And in the case of 14B, then I thought, well, wouldn't it just be easy to give us all the numbers that were the test numbers that you put up, and then we can do the math ourselves? So if you put 28 in precinct 1, I'm just going to subtract that from the number you got, and then I'll kind of know. But it didn't shape up like that. But I know that is still being looked at, and I believe the Senate district over there is going to pay for an audit. Now, here's what happens in I know your point about, let's look at the really red areas, not just the really blue areas, because of course, if it's a really red area, nobody's ever going to look at those ballots. So the Democrats, presumably, or whoever, might be able to just stuff a bunch of information in there. I'm not saying anybody's doing this. I'm just saying, but it would never be brought to light. But when you try to go in and look at those ballots, or do any type of analysis, it will cost money. If you do a recount, the candidate will have to pay for that, unless there's that percentage of difference. Otherwise, that's why, and it's very expensive. And in 2020, myself and the 2 House candidates, I ran for the state Senate, and the 2 House candidates, we did request a ballot recount, but we had to pay for it ourselves. And we started doing one of the precincts, and I think we started on the other one, and then we ended up not going any further, because it was about $1,500 to count per precinct. And when you have 32 or 34, I forget what the number was back then, but times 1,500, that's going to cost a lot of money. And at the end of the day, even if we would have found 10 votes in this precinct and 10 votes in that precinct and 10 votes in another precinct, the presumably the courts would have said, yeah, just take 10 votes out of each of those buckets, but you still would have lost the whole race. But if you do those 10 ballots all across the state of Minnesota in our 4,000 whatever it is precincts, you're going to get a good number of ballots cast that might not be legitimately cast. And again, I'm not saying anybody's doing this. I'm just pointing out a gap where there could be a problem. And I know there were other areas that had ballots on their website that were supposed to be sample ballots, and they did not have the word sample on them. So could somebody have, printed those off and brought them in? Absolutely. And I think really every one of us here in Minnesota wants to have safe and secure elections. Really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter which party you're on, the polka party or the Republican Party, or what the other one was. You want to know that your people who are casting their ballots are doing so in a way that gives them a great deal of confidence. And so I would just say that any way that we figure out these little loopholes, let's try to tighten them up.
No, absolutely. And we all want to have election integrity. And you'd think, let's put it in terms of the Democrat side. We really want to prevent all those Russian bots from being able to influence the election for President Trump. And all joking aside, though, is there any chance of doing away with machine counted ballots and go back to a hand count ballot? It sure works in smaller. I mean, we're
Mhm.
told that it's less expensive, more accurate, and we'll get a result the same night.
Mhm.
Uh, is there any hope of returning to that system where people are really responsible in small units and groups, or larger urban settings? It probably wouldn't work, but
Well, and that's why I say it's so important to get involved in your local communities, because local people can change those directions. It may not have to happen at a statewide level. Maybe you can change it in your own local area. So I think hope springs eternal. And if that it really makes the most sense to go back to our hand ballots, let's do that. But I think even before we get there, what I would like to see is I would like to see us do provisional ballots. Because I will tell you, here in Duluth, where I live, precinct 10, they had 916 people register same day. 916. Okay. So that's a lot of people. Now, of course, that's up in our University of Minnesota Duluth area. So presumably those were students, let's just say that. And so I
but
know you
don't they vote at their home address, or the university is their home? Are we
mm,
sure they're not voting twice?
we don't we're not sure. We just have to take them at their word, and make sure they understand that if they are voting twice, that in a federal election, that would be a felony. Yeah. So what would be really helpful is if we had provisional ballots, so that we can count all the ballots of people that are registered in that area, and then take the provisional ballots, check them out, and then have them cast, especially if it's a close race. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to have people casting ballots that weren't aware that they shouldn't be casting ballots, um, or we're not really allowed to cast ballots, because we don't want to have people get in trouble, just because someone has said, well, you can vote here. Because I think with the Secretary of State's laws, or rules, it's 20 days. If you consider your place for 20 days, you can call that home. Now, most of our college students presumably would call their main home address their home, and then vote in that ballot, but some do not. So it would just really be nice if we had a way to curtail some of this, and have provisional ballots. I think we are the only state now. Somebody's going to have to do their homework for me, but if not the only state, one of the only states that does not have provisional ballots. So we're really an outlier in that area.
I don't understand why we can't have a tighter system, maybe with an actual voter registration card that you swipe into a machine, much like a credit card or an EBT card. You can't expect that you could have your photograph. That would involve a lot of legislation, of course. But if
Mhm.
we wanted to have secure ballots, you can guarantee that somebody's not using the same cash card, both here in Minnesota and down in Texas. When I'm traveling, I'll let my credit union know that I'm traveling so that I don't get denied, because I have a regional. I put a lock on my cards suddenly used, or the numbers are used in another part of the world,
Mhm.
then it shuts that down, and I get a phone call or a text message from my credit union. Uh, we could have much. We could have a system like that where the voter puts in their voter registration number, perhaps on a touchpad and on the screen, and then well, anyway, I'm thinking way outside the box, but that way your
Yeah,
vote is registered and you're only allowed to vote once, and everybody
yeah.
knows who it is, and you're the person who knows your code. If banks can figure this out, if airline industry can figure this out for passengers boarding, millions of passengers boarding planes all over the world with
Right.
multiple destinations, we should be able to figure out our elections in Minnesota, and we
Mhm.
should all want that to work
Right.
correctly.
Right.
Did you notice in my race? I mean, and I don't think that looking into it would overturn the result, but there were no results pointed with reported at 1:45 or 1:36 in the morning whenever it was released. There were
Mhm.
zero precincts reported, so I had to wonder who was up all night counting the ballots.
Mhm.
But in 25B, my race was the only one that had no results, and
Hmm.
that was a little bit strange. Somebody postulated that perhaps they just didn't. I don't know, well, I won't say the hypothetical part out loud, but there
It is
were updated
interesting.
results. over a week later,
Mm.
the numbers went up for my candidacy uh, by they jumped up over 7,000, and I haven't gone back to look at the Secretary of State's, but I don't know what ballots would be coming in over the course of the next week because the numbers moved from 6,000 into 7,000, so that's significant. Where are
It
the
is.
ballots coming from? But
What I
it's
understand too was that the law had changed, so people were allowed to drop off their absentee ballots the day of, and so those had to
oh,
be run through the absentee ballot board, and they had to be verified, and then they had to be fed into the system. From what I understood, because we had a similar thing happen in St. Louis County. It was very late in the night when those results got posted, and so people wonder why was that, and in other counties around the state too. And the reason I was given was because of that extra time that people were allowed, that there were ballots that came in that they had to process and then put into the system. But 7,000 seems like a pretty high number. So I would be kind of curious
well,
about that.
it jumped over the top from like if whatever it was in the 6,000 range, close to, but it went over the top. It flipped the
Hmm.
digit, but um, still did pretty well. And I'm anyway moved the dial. I don't want to make this about me, but it's about election integrity, and hopefully we can get back to having election day instead of election season or election
Yeah. Oh,
months and months. You've
I would
got 2 years to get ready to vote. It's your civic duty. Let's instill that in people and get them to the ballots, and let's make it work, and let's have a result the same day. Sorry, I was talking over you, Matt.
No,
Did
I
you
was
want to?
saying, yes, I hope so too. I would really like to even let's just start pulling it back. Can we go to 15 days? I mean, why do we have to have 46 days? I think that's just a little excessive. Actually, I think it's quite excessive. So,
Yeah.
ideally, I'd like to move back to same day. And there could be exceptions. Certainly, we can talk about those, but I think 46 days is excessive. Hmm.
And we're still doing pop-up balloting. Are we doing that yet, or are we not doing pop-up balloting in Minnesota? I
Sure. Yeah.
forgot.
Yep, there was. I think one of the ones that made a lot of news was the one at the University of Minnesota down in the Twin Cities, where they had an early voting center set up. And I forget, there was somebody famous that came and helped drive people back and forth on the golf cart to get to those voting locations. So, that does happen. Of course, both sides can request a pop-up ballot if for example, the Republicans thought that it would be helpful to have a pop-up ballot box halfway between one of our big counties, so that people didn't have to drive as far. We could request that and try to see how we could make that work. But that's another, I think, area where, there could be a lot of concern.
Yes, definitely. So these are really good things to be talking about now as we start the next election cycle, moving toward the gubernatorial race. And how can we lay the groundwork? Maybe that's one of the issues. This is a good segue into my next question for you. How
Mhm.
can we lay the groundwork and have a preparation to resist and support our gubernatorial candidate toward fighting the walls regime? We've mentioned, of course, the fraud, the economic issues. My main concern, along with some others, if I could just verbalize this, because you might find this interesting. I'm sure you've already thought of it, but the nation is definitely going to benefit and has already benefited from the presidency of Donald J. Trump. We have a president again that foreign leaders are speaking to. There's communications going on, and the caravans some of them are turning around, others not. Things are getting better already. And so when President Trump is inaugurated on the 20th, things are just going to get better and better with people's finances and the prices and the economy. I'm thinking there's a danger that the Democrats in Minnesota are going to take credit for that. Although it's a case of a rising tide lifts all boats, Minnesota is going to benefit from the Trump presidency, whether they like it or not. But you can trust them to say they did that.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, sure. Maybe that's just, human nature, or maybe it's just political nature. I don't know. If things are going well, sure, you want to take credit for it. And I think you will see that. And we know historically that the president in the midterm elections, that party always has a more difficult time. So we are going to have a difficult time because it's not just the governor race, it's all 5 constitutional officers. So governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, auditor, the whole Minnesota House, the whole Minnesota Senate, 1 US senator, and then our congressional offices. So 2026 is going to be a very busy year. And when you talk about laying the groundwork, I say, yeah, let's do that right now. People that are interested, maybe have that Trump energy behind them, I would just really encourage them to look on our website, the Minnesota GOP website, mngop.org. You can click down under get involved, and there's tabs there that can connect you with your local area. If you are really kind of interested in doing that with the local Republican group, we have affiliate groups. So if you are a woman and you want to join our women affiliate group, or labor, we have labor affiliates, and you can go through that list too. There's multiple ways to get involved. But by doing so, you're going to get to be part of that groundwork that we're laying. We want to identify who our people are, who our voters are in that area. And then we want to be able to educate them as to what we need to do to make sure that we're going to be able to win. We have to drive out all of our votes. One of the big things we have to overcome is the metro area. I think in the last governor race, Waltz got, was it 43% out of the metro area of his votes. So so it would be really great if we could get everybody in greater Minnesota to just really drive those numbers up, vote, our way, and then be able to tip a little bit of the metro area. So we need everybody to do that and to help us out and do that. And of course, then we need good candidates. So if you have an inkling to run for one of our House races, or even the Senate race, the Minnesota Senate is going to be up on the ballot too. So we'll need lots and lots of candidates. And then of course, people in some areas have county commissioners, school boards, and city council races too.
Hmm. So that was a question I wanted to ask you too, about how people can get involved in their local party units. And you mentioned it's mngop.org. Is that
Yep,
right?
that's
So I
correct.
at mngop.org, just to make sure we say that 4 or 5 times to plug it. And if people
Yeah,
get involved local, right? And think outside the box, but certainly bring it down to local action in your party units. You can get involved.
great.
So that's really good advice. And um, are there other things we can do to get ready for like when we're looking at good candidates, do we want to go with conventional advice that we should run somebody who's Democrat light so we appeal
Mhm.
to the middle? Or do you think that's shifting a little bit toward, hey, let's just go ahead and run whole hog a real distinctive character and personality, so that there's a clear delineation and differentiation between ourselves and the other party? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? That came up in a couple other, sorry, that's a little bit of a difficult question. You can think about that if you want to, or not respond to it at all. But it's come up in conversations today again.
Sure. I mean, honestly, myself, I think you have to really run authentic leaders. And that's really why I am still involved, because in 2016, I was able to, or 2014, I'm sorry, I was able to meet and work with Jeff Johnson, and then run with him in 2018 on that governor, lieutenant governor ticket. And one thing that Jeff never deviated from was his principles and his policy direction. He wasn't like Governor Waltz, who went up onto the mining area, wore his "I'm pro mining," and then went down to the metro area and wore his "I'm anti mining." You really that just
Yeah.
is so wrong, in my opinion. I think people are really looking um, for somebody that's going to govern with transparency, somebody that's going to govern with accountability, somebody that's going to pay attention to the same issues that are being talked about around the kitchen table. And I still think it's going to be in 2016 the economy and law and order. And although I think President Trump at that time will have made great gains, I think there's still going to be gains to be made, because we went pretty far down the other way. So people will be paying attention to those things.
And I guess there's a good place to end, but I wanted to ask you one more question. Maybe like you touched on how Walls was going up to the Iron Range, and then he was against mining, and going all over the place. I'm sure he changed his accent too as he went from region to region around Minnesota. But what can we expect coming out of the Democrat Borg in the coming 2-year process? I mean, are there any things we should watch out for that are going to be coming from the left-hand side of the political realm?
Mhm.
Any there?
Well, good question. I think they're going to try to claw back, their power. They're going to try to really point out, how they were better at governing than what we are able to do. They'll keep pointing to whatever accomplishments Biden had made on the national level, and saying, Trump can't compare with that. So I think there's going to be a level of that. I really hope that the media will play fair and balanced, and that they would give both sides equal opportunity to lay out their case. I think that's really one of the big things we have to overcome, is that the traditional media does tend to favor the Democrats and does tend to push their agenda and their talking points more than they do the Republican side. So that'll be a big hurdle we'll have to overcome. But I think the Democrats they're in disarray right now, and they know that. They ran a very unpopular candidate that was not only unpopular with the nation, but within their own party. So they're going to have to do some thinking and trying to figure out, where they stand on all these issues, and where do they stand as a party. So anyway, that's what I would say. And
Yeah.
yeah, at the end of the day, really, we're all Americans here. We all need to do what's best for our constitutional republic, and see where we can, get stronger as a nation.
Yes, and I absolutely agree with everything you say. And the only thing I would add is she was so unpopular. She had less than 1% of the when she was in Iowa. She didn't make it out of the gate. And then of course the Democrats, have they even noticed that they haven't been able to choose their candidates for a very, very long time? I mean, Bernie was treated very badly, and his nomination was stolen from him, and he might have been a candidate that would have appealed to a lot of those Antifa, and it was a different time we were in back then, but he wouldn't
Yeah.
do so well today. But yeah, very unpopular candidates. And then she did us a big favor by thrusting Tim Walz onto a national stage. He was so unprepared. The way that was just delicious to
Yeah.
have all of Minnesota's dirty laundry on the clothesline, just
Mhm.
being hung up, men's and women's, right? On all everybody
Yeah.
saw. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, they're talking about the fraud, and then he's being subpoenaed to appear in Congress.
The stolen valor. I mean, there's just on and it went, right? The
Yeah,
coziness with China. Yeah, it
right.
was really quite incredible. And in the good news about that is we had a lot of people that when our candidates were out would say to them, we had no idea Waltz was, like this, did this, whatever. And it was because our media kept it covered up. Yeah. So we
That's
need to
absolutely correct. Suddenly he's vetted on a national stage, and people were saying, wow, they're talking about this stuff. We were told this was a conspiracy. We didn't know this was real. Well, yeah, now you're seeing it on CNN. So I guess that makes it real.
right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation again, Donna. Congratulations on your victory again. And the Minnesota Republican Party is in good hands with you as the deputy chair. Thank you very much for your service, ma'am.
thank you, Wes. Yeah, thank you so much. And I just give a shout out for our new chair, Alex Plekish, Chair-elect Alex Plekish. So I look forward to working with him, and then our new secretary, Joy Orvis. So thanks again, Wes. Great to be here. Nice to see you. And we'll see you again.
Thank you, ma'am. Have a very good day and Merry
You
Christmas
too.
to you.
Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.